on in the hope that we can carry on running to time. So Nikki has just started the recording, so I'm going to mark this as the formal start of the public governing body. So although we don't have anyone listening live, this is being recorded and will then be made available via our website for people to watch unedited. Let's make sure that we are talking about the right things. We are making sure that we're putting our patients first, and we're doing so in a way that anyone who does listen will actually be able to understand what it is we're talking about and what things we're referring to. It's very easy to get into corporate language, but you know, if one member of our governing body doesn't understand some of the acronyms we say, I'm pretty certain that the public won't. So let's remind ourselves of that as we go along. Charlotte and Jean, as always, we start with a focus on patient experience, and we've got a video to sort of focus our minds to begin with. Is that right?
Yeah, apologies. Yeah. We were hoping to have someone share their experience of COVID, but they're also a nurse, and it just hasn't. We're on to our B plan. Unfortunately, haven't been able to join us. So the video we're sharing is one that was made for the RD&E board, which was made by someone who felt passionately about the PALS team, who had helped her and her dad communicate with their mum in hospital. So it does give some insight into some of the ways in which during the first wave of COVID, people were able to communicate and what the teams and hospitals were doing to facilitate that, well, particularly in RD&E. So hope you find it interesting and thought-provoking. Jean, is there anything else I've missed?
No, I think that's a really good introduction. Thank you, Charlotte. Shall I play the video?
Yes, please.
Just checking. Thank you.
Yeah, Jean.
I can't hear anything.
When you share your screen, you have to tick the box, which means share your audio. So you might want to stop sharing and start sharing again, and then tick that box, and it might work.
Oh, thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Paul.
That's the community matron from Exeter. I think she does introduce herself at the start of the film, but just off.
Sorry, I will restart from the beginning. Apologies.
Hi, my name's Nick Mathieu. I'm the clinical matron for safety and patient experience here at the Trust. I've been asked to put together a small video for you to let you know about our family liaison service. So at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a huge amount of anxiety and uncertainty, and not helped by the fact that as an organisation, we needed to close our doors to families and visitors. As a patient experience team and department, we knew we needed to do something to help the organisation to continue to deliver the compassionate care that it has always strived to deliver. We did this initially by setting up our family liaison service. This was no mean feat. Our team shifted from a 5-day-a-week service to a 7-day-a-week service. We were enabled to do this due to the flexibility of our amazing PALS team, who pitched up and did weekends. We enlisted volunteers who were absolutely amazing. And we also enlisted ward housekeepers who became our sort of family liaison officers, and our connection to the wards. We also used our comms and hubs team to get the message out there. The service comprised of personal messaging service, which was a daily service. We laminated and hand delivered all of those messages every single day, anything that came in, whether it was on a template, whether it was a video, posters, photographs, whatever it was, we would just laminate it and take it up to those ward areas. Sometimes we would hand deliver them to the patients if the ward teams were busy. We arranged virtual visiting via iPads and smart tech lent to us by the fantastic MyCare team. And we trained all of the ward housekeepers in using that smart tech to enable those appointments to be set up so that people could see their loved ones face to face. And we also helped arrange end of life visits or anywhere where safety might be compromised for patients with learning difficulties or dementia. It was hugely successful. We've had well over in excess of 600 messages. We have had over 500 family contacts for patient property drop-off. That was another part of our service that we delivered, and are still delivering. We have since set back from our 7-day a week to 5 days a week, but we are able to stand that back up with a few days' notice. So rather than me continuing to tell you how amazing the service is, we were really lucky that one of the families that have used our service really wanted to share their experience and let you know what a difference it made to them. Thank you.
So, hi, PALS team.
What are we doing it now?
Yes, we're doing it now. Right. Hi, PALS team. My name's Alexis Bowater, and I'm just doing this so that you can give it to your board to give them some feedback about how amazing you were with my mum. So on the 23rd of May this year, my mum was admitted to the RD&E having had a stroke. She then, this is my dad, Ewan, her husband. She then was in there, she couldn't communicate with us, we couldn't go and see her. She couldn't speak.
Shall I start now?
Yeah.
I wasn't able to see her. No visitors were allowed to the hospital for the first 6 weeks that she was there. I could talk to her on the telephone, but because the stroke had almost made her completely lose her voice, she could only talk in a whisper. That communication was not particularly good. So to get information and entertainment, we sent these newsletters daily, almost, or daily, designed, produced by Alexis, by her daughter Alexis, to pals in the hospital, who then took them to Sue in her bed in the ward, and sometimes read them to her, and sometimes gave them to the excellent nurses to read.
So
having these news sheets encouraged people who didn't want to have to write long emails direct to Sue, didn't know quite what to say, just to send chatty little contributions. But some were very entertaining, and Alexis wrote the leaders for all of them. And so, a typical example is...
Let me just talk them through how we started. So it was pretty difficult to communicate with her at the beginning, and Pal's mum says absolutely saved her bacon by working with us to get this information through to her. So right at the beginning, we started off with just little emails like this. This is very early on. Hi, PALS team. Thank you for your continued kindness. Can you get these messages to Susan Bowater on Cliss Ward? And then I worked with them to evolve these newsletters into something a little bit more special, and they were very kind. So quite soon, they became things like this. Newsletter for Lady B, and they would print them out, they would laminate them, and then they would do things like that. That's handwritten Cliss, that's PALS writing that it needs to go to Cliss Ward. And so over a period of time, we, go on, show them.
This one, when she moved from being in the very serious Cliss Ward to rehab Yelm Ward, we had a leader starting, brilliant move, Mum. Well, we've been on the you have been moving up from one river to another.
And then things like this. So it became more and more fun in lots of ways. So these newsletters, you can see, were printed out. So Mum's called Sue. Yeah, sorry, excuse my terrible punning. But they were really very lovely to us and to Sue as well, because she couldn't talk to us. What's this one? Oh, it's one of the originals. They know that. This is one of the originals. So what it did was it broke down that barrier between us and her, and I'm just going to show you. This is just a printout of just some of the ones that they managed to get to her. I think without the PALS team, it would have been a much darker place for Mum to be. As it was pretty difficult and frightening, but she wasn't able to communicate with us really in any way at all right at the beginning.
No.
We couldn't get to her, we couldn't get into the hospital, she couldn't get to us, she couldn't speak on the phone because she'd lost her voice. She then got 2 bouts with pneumonia, and really the only way of her communicating with us was through, it was via PALS. So Mum can't be with us just now because the good news is that she's at home. The bad news is it's lunchtime, and that means it's time for her to have a sleep, which is also good news. So what we want to say is thank you very, very much from myself, from Dad, from Mum, from all of our family, from our extended family, from all of her friends who managed to get messages through to her, and just to emphasise to you and everyone else on the board how important what they did was, and how important their role has been, and how amazing and flexible they were, and how much of a difference they made, not only to your patient, my mum, but also to all of our family. So we'd just like to say,
I totally endorse that. Best wishes, and thank you very much to PAL.
thank you.
Hello, I'm Katie, and for the last 3 months I've been acting as the family liaison nurse for the intensive care unit. I've got 7 years of clinical experience. However, during the COVID pandemic, I've had to step away from direct patient contact due to my pregnancy and my own safety. I've opted to stay at work and help create this role, the family liaison nurse, in order to support not only my colleagues but the relatives and the patients on our unit. During this very difficult time, whilst the relatives cannot come in to visit their loved ones. In this role, I have regular contact with the relatives, whether it's for psychological support or any clinical support, so explaining any tubes and procedures that might be going in and happening to their loved ones whilst they're in intensive care. With the relatives, we fill out a form called This Is Me to let the nurses and all the clinical staff know more about the patient that we're looking after on a personal level. So anything that's like what name they like to be called, what radio station they'd like to listen to, and any of their interests and hobbies. These can be very useful for rehabilitation as well. We've set up a dedicated email address of which relatives can forward in any messages and photos, which then get printed out and taken to the patient for them to read or put up in their bed space. And most importantly, the biggest part of our role is connecting the patients with their relatives through a video calling service. We have iPads as well as phones that we can use in order to send it in for the nurses to then facilitate the rest of that video call with the patients and their relatives. This helps the nurses looking after those patients focus all their time on their care, as well as it being very difficult to use these devices when they're in full PPE and double gloved. The touch screens don't work very well. And also, while speaking to relatives on the telephone, not being able to have that same communication as you normally would without PPE on. Finally, we've also adopted this sharing of hearts towards the end of life. So we give 1 heart to the dying patient and 1 heart to the relative to symbolise the love that they share and that they're together even at the end of that moment when they cannot be here to visit. They've been very kindly donated by members of the public for us. During this role, I've connected with multiple relatives and families, and during this pandemic to be able to support them in the best way possible, and I feel like they've very much benefited from that rather than just feeling like they've been left in the dark and no one cares. It's very much improved the patient's experience as well by being able to hear their relatives' voices or by being able to see their relatives when they're awake enough to realise they're at the end of the video call. I'm very glad to have had the opportunity to work in this role and make a difference to all those patients and relatives and my wonderful colleagues. It makes me very proud of the job that I've been doing and to be able to support our unit during this time. As well as it being very difficult to use these devices when they're
Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Charlotte, for sharing that with us. There was even a David Greenwell video sitting at the bottom of your selection there, just below Gordon Ramsay. So I don't know what to read into that, David, but maybe we'll watch them later. Thank you. And I think it reflects during phase 1 some of the tensions between doing the right thing for the population around infection control and how you provide that route through for love and affection communication to people who are feeling sick and vulnerable and potentially at end of life. And it's good to see that lots of novel solutions are being sought in our practices. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, can I also say, I wondered if they had the same resource ever to replicate in social care, because it also made me think that it was, you know, it was a great example, but I wonder of all those people who've got, you know, loved ones in care homes, and we hear about, you know, how they just sort of, you know, forgotten. So it sort of also highlighted to me maybe the difference between the resource that was available to kind of be innovative and flexible within an acute trust versus what opportunity there was for social care providers to be able to, you know, do the same thing effectively for also people who are effectively shut away for weeks on end from their family.
I think that's right. There were, during the care home webinars that were happening, 1 or 2 care home providers and managers came on and talked about some of the novel things that they were doing. I seem to recall there was at least one episode where they were looking at how they tried to maintain that that link with family. What I think would be good is, why don't we see if we can have a look and pull some of that, because it'll be good to see, to revisit and see if there's anything that we can do working with our local authorities about you know, getting that message and getting those opportunities out to our care home providers. I think that's a fair challenge, Charlotte. Have we got any hands up? No. Any more comments or questions?
Alison has her hand up, Paul.
Oh, Alison, did you? Sorry, Alison, I didn't see that.
Just going to say that one of the care homes at least has developed a system of booking in FaceTime calls or Skype calls with all their residents on a regular basis. So I think it is becoming the norm. Good. Okay. And maybe it's just checking with, you know, some of the social care teams in the local authorities that that it is becoming the norm rather than just the odd exception. But we can certainly look at doing that. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Charlotte, for that. That's a good positive way to start our meeting, where actually people are just working on practical solutions to overcome some of those social boundaries. Okay, so next item, welcome and apologies. We got apologies from Sonia, Gaynor, Glynis and Ruth. We do have a question from the public. So although the member of the public isn't here with us, they are aware that it's being recorded. So let me just get that up. So the question that was raised was, as you will be aware, the CCG spent £13.8 million last year on stoma and neurology appliances, which is one of the largest spends in England. Many CCGs are advancing plans to centralise services with the aims of improving patient experience, increasing formulary compliance and containing costs. Do you have any plans to look into this area? And if so, who will be leading on this? And our response, which we will be sending out to the person who raised the question, will be that we're planning a review of the provision of stoma and neurology appliances later in next year. It's complex, and we're aware that some CCGs are making proposals for service change, and we will take any learning from them as part of that future review. As with lots of our services, the CCG delivers. Our spend is comparatively higher than other CCGs because, of course, we are the 5th largest CCG in the country, so it reflects our size. Any further review will be undertaken by the Medicines Optimisation team within the CCG in partnership with our providers, and we'll communicate that answer to the person who raised that question. The next item, we've got register of interests. So anything on that register of interests that needs adding or altering from anyone?
And anything in our upcoming agenda that people want to particularly raise an interest regarding that we should be aware of. Okay. All right, and then we go into the minutes of the last meeting. So I will take that. Let me just get the front page of the minutes. And I'll take that from the number within the minutes. So page 1 and 2, this is for accuracy. Pages 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. So we have got 5 actions still open. Action 1 is with you, Andrew. Sheila asked if individual conversations have taken place with clinical staff members to offer support and inquire about preferences of working from home or work-based. Any update on that?
Yeah, Chair, the update is in there. So we know that 19 GPs have completed their conversations and there's 35 outstanding. So we're just working with colleagues just to make sure those 35 are completed, and I'm assured they'll be done by the next governing body meeting, so all will be complete as they have been for all of the rest of the CCG staff.
Okay. Sheila, if you are happy that there is I see you got your hand up. Did you want to comment on that particular action?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm happy for it to be closed, but I am just a bit curious because I'm sure that the answer at the last governing body was that yes, they had all been contacted, and so I'm curious as to why it looks like the clinical leads were omitted en masse from this initiative.
They've not been omitted, Sheila, they just haven't been completed. So as I said, there's some outstanding, but they will be done by the next meeting. Yeah,
but Andrew, last governing body, you told me that everybody had been contacted, and that's clearly not true.
I think everybody's been contacted, but the conversations haven't been completed, Sheila. But I'll make sure that that's done by the next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
So just on clarification, Andrew, there was an initial contact to set up the conversation. Is that what I'm reading into that? So the initial contact has been made. Can you confirm that for everyone? But the conversation that then it should trigger has not been made with everyone.
Yeah, and I'm really keen that we make sure they're complete. It would be easy to say they've been done and they haven't. So I wanted assurance that the conversation had actually taken place.
Okay, all right. Is that okay, Sheila? Yeah, okay, all right. And then we're happy to close that to know that they've been contacted and therefore there is a plan in place. There was a foreclosure. This was about only 2 referees will be sought for the appointment of the CEO, the lead chief exec, and the CCG accountable officer. And Piers has been in conversation with Gatorby Sanderson, who said that actually not taking 2 referees is normal in this process. So we are not out of kilter with what national and what normal process is. Item 3 is that I would write to Susie, feeding back on the outcome from our discussions regarding the governance paper around the ICS, and I have done that and received a copy of that. Sheila, did you want to come back on item 2?
Yeah, it was just around that question about a number of referees, because I think that the discussion was, were we happy with only having 2? And part of that discussion was what's normal, but I don't think that's answered what I thought was the question, which was, are we happy as a governing body with only 2 referees?
Okay, all right. So in part of the chair's update very shortly, the only thing I was going to bring people's attention to in the chair's report was around the recruitment. So as long as we make sure we have that conversation in a couple of minutes, because there may well be a subsequent action coming from that, that actually supersedes this one. So let's hold that until we get onto the chairs, but let's make sure we cover that. Okay. Item 4 is for closure, and Nikki was to link with SLT administrator to add a review of the risk registers to the next SLT agenda, and Nikki, you said that that has happened. And then item 5, to add Children's and Family Health Devon Improvement Plan to the forward plan of the governing body to be held in December. And Nikki has said that that has been put in place. Okay, so that does take us to the chair's report, and in fact the only part of that I was going to highlight was around the recruitment for the system lead executive combined with the CCG accountable officer. And just to give an update of where we're at the moment, we are currently at the point of long listing, and Gate & B Sanderson, our recruitment agency, are having further conversations with the long listed applicants, and then we'll be presenting to us the outcomes of those discussions on Monday, where the interview panel will be shortlisting ahead of interviews on the 18th with stakeholder panels on the 17th. So that's where we are in the process. How are we getting on? I am encouraged by some of the applicants that we've had, that actually I think we will get a short list of interviewable candidates, and on paper there are some real strengths there, and so it does feel like quite a positive process at the moment. There is still a lot to go through. There's they will do some psychometric assessments as well as the stakeholder review. What I think will be quite useful that we're adding in the week prior to the interviews is we are asking each of the shortlisted candidates to have a short presentation and Q&A with our wider stakeholders, including voluntary services, hospices, and so on, and then another one with patient groups and public groups. And then they will be feeding back via a SurveyMonkey to us. So we will get a sense of how they engage with the wider stakeholders and with the wider population. And I think that will be really helpful, given that one of the things that we talked about was around that wider engagement being one of the priorities of the CCG. So it feels like a really good, robust process. It feels like we're in a good place at the moment, and then we see where we are come the 18th when we get to the end of that. And I know Sheila has raised a query about the number of referees that we get. So on discussions with Gate & B Sanderson, they are taking those referees. They are also doing quite a lot of background checks, as they would do as a recruitment firm, and having quite a lot of extended discussions and conversations with the clients themselves. Certainly when we discuss this, when Susie and I discuss this, that when we combine that with the degree of stakeholder panels that we're having in place and the psychometric work that's also going to happen and inform this, we felt that we were getting as rounded a view of the applicants as we possibly could. But of course, if there is a preference to increase the number of referees, then we can do that. It's not an impossible thing to put in place. Judy.
Can I say it can be quite common to do more than 2 references, and one particularly good thing that has been used in a number of places is asking for a reference for from someone who has worked for the individual, as opposed to someone they have worked to. And of course, as with any reference, the candidate is not going to choose a referee that is going to say loads of bad things about them. But one of the big challenges as you get to people who are more and more senior is you know quite well, but it's how they manage down that can be very significant in their ability to achieve things. So I would propose that that become part of the conversation if it hasn't been already. The other thing I was going to ask is the CCG will have a discussion, or representatives of the CCG will have a discussion with the candidate. And you didn't mention that, I don't think, just now when you talked about stakeholders, wider stakeholders, and patients. So I just thought it was important for us to note that as well.
Yes. So the week before will be those presentations, and then the day before the interviews on the 17th, there are 4 stakeholder panels where each of the candidates will be facilitating a discussion, and the topic of that will be circulated in advance. It's just being finalised. And that is the CCG governing body is one group. We will be having the chief executives and the chairs of the NHS organisations. There will be another group, local authorities, including leaders, chief executives, directors of adult services, children's services, and public health. And then the 4th group is clinicians, including the 2 system medical directors, the primary care collaborative board chairs, and the NHS organisation medical directors. So those are the 4 stakeholder groups. I think what's really important to add to the CCG one is that is the only, you as the governing body are the only stakeholder group that will be particularly able to focus on their function as the accountable officer. So yours is crucial to provide that feedback on whether you think that they can lead the organisation in its route to becoming a strategic commissioner, its continuing journey in meeting its statutory obligations and playing its role as one of the lead organisations within the system.
Can I just say, I think that's really, sorry, I'm echoing, that's really good. And I'm delighted to hear how much effort is going into making this work, because when you hear things like, well, it's standard to have 2 referees, so we don't really need more, you kind of feel quite flat about it. Whereas actually this is such an important post to us, but also to the whole Southwest economy, you know, in many ways. So it's good to know that all this extra stuff is being done, because that's what it needs. It's worth millions, this decision.
Yeah. So I'm not fixed on number of referees. What we felt was actually if we put them through the mill during the process, that would give us more insight into the individual than necessarily something written by their favourite line managed person or whatever it might be. But I have no problem in increasing the amount of information we get on the candidates. Nick. You might be on mute, Nick.
This is just a thought that leads on from Judy's, I think, excellent suggestion about getting a referee from somebody that the person has line managed. I've not heard of that before, and it seems an eminently sensible thing. But given the particular skill set we need in this role, I think it would also be worth asking them to get a referee with whom they have had no line management responsibility in either direction, because the single most important relationship this person's got to build is with the big acute chief execs, isn't it? If they can't get them to do stuff and they've got no line authority over them, they can't tell them to do anything. So I think it'd be really interesting to get a referee from somebody that they've worked with who's just on a par with them.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sheila.
Whilst I think Judy's suggestion is excellent, there is an obvious risk that they will nominate somebody who hopes to step into their own shoes and therefore who is not uninvested in giving a good reference.
Yeah, but
I guess there is always a flaw. There is always a flaw when you ask people to decide who they want as their referees. They will always select, and you will always get a biased view of those individuals. I suppose there will be a skill, I'm not sure whether I have it, but I'm hoping people around me have it, of being able to read between the lines of a reference in order to help inform us. I'm reluctant to keep increasing the number of referees exponentially, but certainly if you are comfortable that I take this discussion and I take this proposal into our meeting on the 2nd when we come up with the shortlist, and have a discussion with them about who within their relationships of current working would best paint us a picture of them as an individual, managing up, down and sideways. and then we can see if we can be specific in the type of referees that we want and the number. People happy with that as an approach? And I will certainly say that there is quite a lot of discussion here that more than 2 will give us that added information. Okay. Well, I hope next time that we meet as a governing body in public, I will be able to give us some good news and some exciting news around leadership on its way to Devon. So that would be hopefully a good opportunity for us. Anything else we want to pick up from the chair's report? And if not, I will move swiftly on to the accountable officer's report. Simon.
Thanks, Paul. I was going to say something about you being able to make an announcement about great leadership for Devon next time round, but I'll move on from that one. So please take the report as read. There were just 2 things I wanted to raise from it. So the Teignmouth and Dawlish consultation element, I thought you'd be interested to know we had 1,010 responses from the public. So our virtual meetings, so very grateful for Paul and David's support in presenting the care model and the clinical case for change, and for Joe supporting as well with the sitting on the panel. So whilst we didn't have as many as I would have liked on the virtual meetings, they were very, very engaged. So we had lots and lots of questions on those, but smaller numbers. We did, of course, video them, so we're keeping an eye on how many times those have been viewed as well. So the paper is now being, or the report is now being written by Health Watch. It'll be presented back to the team to then work through, and we are still on course to bring back a document or a report to governing body in December for a decision. So we're still on track with that. And then in terms of staff awards, so it doesn't say in here because we were probably still counting them at the time, but 244 nominations, so that's up from 100 last time. So very, very pleased with that engagement from the workforce, because it's been a very difficult year, as you know, and people are tired, but the fact that they took the time to nominate colleagues, I think, has been fantastic. And we've now agreed when the ceremony will take place, and it's on November the 11th, 4 till 6. And if anybody hasn't got that in their diary, let me know, and I'll make sure that is forwarded to you. It should be a really good event, good couple of hours to reflect on the successes of our workforce. So happy to take any questions or direct them to exec colleagues that have more detail.
Thanks, Graham.
Thank you, Paul. Simon, I just wanted to congratulate you and the team, Andrew and Jenny Turner, on the consultation at Teignmouth and Dawlish. I've had an opportunity to contrast that level of consultation and engagement with another public agency, which I won't bother to name, which has decided to drive through some change proposals in another part of Devon, and has used COVID as an excuse not to hold any consultation. So it is fantastic that you've managed to do that level of consultation, and I'm really impressed that not only have you done online, but you've allowed people to telephone to a helpline, that you've gone out to meet hard to reach groups remotely. So honestly, I think you've set an industry level standard, and you should really be thanked properly for doing that. If I could just seek one clarification, you referred to, I think, 1,010 responses. Is that written responses to the questionnaire, or was that attendees at the meetings?
So it's a mix, Graham. It's those that have given comments and responses on our proposals. So some of those will have come through the virtual meetings, but not many. It will mostly be either telephone or in written response to the questionnaire.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thanks. And I think I will echo it. Having been asked to be part of the panel, I think the approach that the team went through, where we weren't protected in any way, the questions were only screened if they were personal, but otherwise we faced all the sort of strong concerns that we would have done in a public meeting. albeit one can argue with the emotion taken out of it, but we still had to answer some of those tough questions. And there were still, you know, significant, consistent messages that we heard that we are going to have to go away and we're going to have to make sure that we have properly addressed. So I think it was set up in a way to give it the best chance of working over that virtual environment. Sheila and Charlotte, I didn't see whose hand came up first. Charlotte, you're first on my screen. I will go to you first.
It was Sheila, but it's fine. I was just going to add to the fact that also the team have been doing reflective learning sessions. So they're learning around the process which will inform the digital strategy, but also engagement more broadly. And I think that is something that is really to be recognised as much as the engagement, is that the willingness to learn around and reflect on what's been working well and how to improve things. So I did one of those sessions with the team, and I think there'll be some really interesting insights coming out of the interim report on that, and then a final report. So just wanted to highlight that part of process as well. That's really, I think really groundbreaking in terms of engagement.
Thanks. Sheila.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So setting aside the grammar.
You've muted again, Sheila, sorry.
Sorry. Right, so setting aside the pain that the grammatical construction of the last sentence under Think 111 first gives me, I also think it's rather opaque in the way it reads, and it doesn't actually, provide much clarity around what patients are supposed to be contacting practices about and what they're supposed to be contacting Think 111 about. Anything that they normally contact their GP for. So I wonder if perhaps that the person that wrote the report is clear, because I'm not.
Okay, so we'll so you don't. I'm assuming you don't want me to answer what that's for. Now I can do what that's for. Well, Jo can do. I'm sure she's got a hand up. But I think what I'm taking away from that is we need to be much clearer in our communications when we're going out to the public on what we want them to do in terms of GP practices versus Think 111. That's your point, Sheila, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Jo, you had your hand up. I wondered whether you wanted to come in.
So I don't know whether you want me to now or not. I think Simon's made the point. I think just for clarity then, considering we're in public. So in terms of what's the expectation on the public around contacting GP practices? So in hours GP practice is exactly the same as it was before. So no change to if a patient needs a primary care service, they're to do exactly the same thing as they would usually do in terms of the routes they're currently contacting in hours general practice. This is very much about supporting, particularly to make sure patients get into the right place in terms of urgent care out of hours, but also in hours in terms of being able to support alternative pathways to ED. But if a member of the public thinks they need primary care in hours, they should still phone their practice as they usually would. But take the point, if it's not clear enough, we've got a comms work stream which is working on the public comms, which will start on the 1st of December.
Thanks, Jo. That's helpful. I've still got 3 hands. Graham, is that an old or a new one? It's an old one. And Charlotte, same one as before. And Sheila, did you want?
Yeah, mine's new. Thanks, Paul. Yes. So I think that's a missed opportunity, because speaking as a GP, patients contact GP practices with things that aren't appropriate, that could be better dealt with by other organisations and other services, pharmacy being one of them. They can self-refer to many practices. Some things are social needs. That's a missed opportunity not to remind the public about those other ways. We need to make sure that we protect general practice here, not encourage the public to use them inappropriately.
I think that's a good point. I think Jo, just have a think about that at the moment. I'll bring Simon in and then back to Jo. Simon.
Okay. Yeah, I just was interested in your comment about the BAME work, Simon, and wanted to sort of possibly ask a bit more? Do you think we've got enough services, enough projects going on for those communities in Devon? And if and when we get that feedback, when do you think it will come back to us, and will it come back here? Because I'd be interested to know more about that.
Yeah, so I'm sure Andrew will come in with some of the details. So I think the answer is we don't know at the moment, Simon, and that's why the piece of work that Susie Leather is leading, but working closely with Andrew, is all about, to try to get that feedback from this population about what services are there, what they need, what needs to be different. And I think absolutely it ought to come back here. And I think the recommendation will be that it goes to all wards within the ICS. But Andrew's probably got more detail.
Yeah, I think Simon, what it's highlighting, just very, very early findings, is that we're doing nowhere near enough, either for staff, our own staff, or indeed for patients and the public and local communities. It shows we're lacking data, lacking action, and we are doing little bits, but it's in very small pockets across Devon. So I think that's what it will say. That's based on early findings with conversations with lots of people across the system.
So Joe, back to you. I guess the challenge is with this communication going out, can we consider broadening it to include all the steps from self-help all the way through to a 999 ambulance and everything in between, in order to make sure that we tackle pressures at all levels of the system and not just A&E?
Yes, I think there are two things. I completely understand the sentiment. I think there are two things. So in terms of the comms that we will really be starting to push for the 1st of December, that doesn't mean that we also at the same time can't push the comms that we currently push around appropriate access to things like pharmacy, etc. So that doesn't mean that we can't do that at the same time. So I think that's really helpful. I think where we are at the moment with this, obviously there's a big push nationally to get Think 111 up and running for the 1st of December. I don't think I can't emphasize enough how much work is involved in doing that. At the moment, the absolute focus is on making sure that if people can be seen in another setting as opposed to an emergency department, which really helps to make sure that people can get seen in a timely way and we can reduce the risk of infection, etc. That is the first phase. So I think that's what I would say is this is a massive project and it won't stop on the 1st of December. The first phase is about that initial alternative pathways to ED, but that doesn't mean that we can't look to open it up. What I would say is, and why it's important we do it in a phased approach, not just because of the work involved, but also the significant amount of workforce and training that's involved, and the amount of staff that Devon Doctors, as our provider of the 111 service, have had to recruit over the last few months and train up until the 1st of December is significant. So I think that's something that I will take back to the programme board to look at as a next phase to this project.
Then Joe, I suppose it's then looking at the nuance of the language in which way this is communicated, and particularly in that element about carry on using general practice as you are, making sure that reflects the rest of our our push around non-statutory organisations for a lot of these things that you don't need to see your GP or contact your GP about. So if we get that language nuance right, then probably we may not need to broaden it, but make sure that the other publicity that we're pushing out is referred to in a way that that helps reinforce that rather than potentially work against it. Yeah, I think that's probably the helpful way around that. Sheila, would that work given the pressures that it's otherwise under to manage?
Yes, it's just a case of avoiding unintended consequences and remembering to be joined up. Thank you.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Anything else for Simon on the AO's report? Okay, thank you, Simon. Well, actually, then we stick with you for item 7.1, which is the outcomes framework.
Yeah, so it won't be me for very long, because I'll be I did warn Virginia that I would be passing across to her. So we've been working on outcomes framework off and on for 12 months or so, and colleagues will remember Paul O'Sullivan has presented a first iteration of this well before the pandemic. started, but it's been taken further forward by Simon Chant, who works in Virginia's team, and Kelvin Grabham, who you all know works with us. Virginia presented this to the partnership board a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, and we just wanted to bring this so you were up to date with where we are in terms of the iteration of the outcomes framework. But I'll hand over to Virginia to give a more detailed update.
Thank you, Simon. So just referring to the paper, you've got an outline there in terms of the some of the parameters that discussion at what was then the Integrated Commission Executive meeting was about, thinking through how we could make an outcomes framework better than just a list of indicators. And the framework is divided into two sections. So it's part of it looks at the health of the population of the CCG area, which of course covers 3 local authorities: Devon County Council, Plymouth Council and Torbay Council. And the outcomes there are very much relating to health in its broadest sense. There is a direct link across to the outcomes which have been selected by each of the 3 health and wellbeing boards, which have the responsibility for health improvement and reducing health inequality. And then the second part of it is to look at how one might measure the health of the ICS, the integrated care system. So thinking about those sorts of indicators, which are the outcomes of health and care. And those two things sit side by side, and also to, again, create a direct link across to joint health and wellbeing strategies. There's a life course approach that's been taken to selecting some indicators and putting those together so that they fit together as 2 halves of a whole. So that's quite an innovative and a very different approach to what's been done previously. The other thing that's important about it is that it builds on the best of the work that's been done, again, largely by health and wellbeing boards, in thinking about how you unpick health inequalities. And that's a key part of what the NHS is currently doing as part of its forward planning. But it's about making sure that an analysis and an understanding of inequality is actually built into the outcomes framework. The outcomes framework itself, it will need to link across to a set of performance indicators, and obviously there are hundreds of those, but and that's for further development, because obviously there are indicators that have to be measured, and then there are other ones that local populations, place-based groups may want to add to those, depending on differentials in health needs, health and care needs. But actually what it does mean is that even the outcomes framework itself can be linked to those place-based footprints. So again, just moving forwards, I just wanted to say that in putting this together, it's drawn very much on nationally available validated outcomes measures, which form part of the public health outcomes framework, the NHS outcomes framework and the social care outcomes framework. So they're really good quality measures that can be used and can be supplemented with local data. So if I move down through the report, just to touch very quickly on the landscape pages on the document. So these are on page 36 and 37, just going past those. It isn't going to look like this, because one of the things that we wanted to do was to build on the best of the development work that we've been doing through population health management, and also the way we have developed the Devon County Council website for COVID-19, where we have used website design to put the information we want together in a way that means that it can be readily accessible, so by members of the public, for example, as well as professionals, but also has got a degree of interoperability so that you can go into it and you can drill down and you can compare and contrast. So although these and the data in these on pages 36 and 37 are just an indication of the kind of background stuff that is used, where we will be able to pull in information about trends, we'll be able to look at, we'll be able to show what the data sources are, we'll be able to look at different footprints and pull all of those together. So there's an opportunity to benchmark. So I'm not going to touch on those, and please don't ask any questions about the data in them, because it's some of it, it's just an example, and some of it isn't actually up to date. So don't look at the detail in that. If I can move you on to page 38 and 39 of the report. So you can see on page 38 what you've got is that on the left hand side you can see the life course. This is the on page 38 what you've got here is the health of the population. So you've got some overarching indicators, and then moving through the life course. And then if you move on to page 39 of the report, you can see that this is the health of the integrated care system. And these are outcomes that are chosen because they are markers of system working across the health and care system. And they're ones that, as I say, many colleagues will be familiar with. It's not set in stone. One of the things that's really important about the framework is that we had a small group of very able individuals drawn from both CCG Business Intelligence, the 3 public health teams, plus social care colleagues and analysts from each of the 3 councils as well. So we had NHS, and we had public health, and we had social care, senior analysts who are used to working with this data, plus, as Simon mentions, Paul O'Sullivan as well, thinking about the link across to population health management, to pull this together. And we will develop it as we go forward. So this is just a starter so that I could get the team working on the web-based version so that we can start playing with it. And the important thing about it is that it is dynamic, and people can use it and they can make comments, and we continuously improve it. And then if I just move on to the final page of the report, which is on page 40, just to show you that this is just an example, looking at fuel poverty, of the sorts of things that we'll be able to do. Again, it won't look like this, but it will enable for a given indicator for us to be able to look at it at locality level, LCP level. We can look at it by socioeconomic deprivation, which will give us a view of things, and we can also look at many of these indicators. In fact, nearly all of them can be looked at PCN level. And the important thing is those indicators come together, and they can be used at a variety of place footprints to be able to build up a picture and an understanding of what's going on. The other thing that we'll be doing, and we're going to do at next week's ICS partnership board, we're going to be doing a bit of a demonstration of what the web-based tool will look like. And one of the other things that we're going to be adding to it is the best of national composite indicators. So there are many really good tools now that have been developed by universities, where they've taken a whole range of indicators and put them together and then map them, so that we can use that in the same way that on the Devon County Council COVID-19 map website, you can get onto the national map to have a look at in more detail at your local area. And we'll also be doing that, so we'll be incorporating some of those national tools as well, because they are quite difficult to get hold of. If you know what you're looking for, it's okay. It's like exploring the www.gov. website, where it can actually be quite difficult to find things. So we want to make sure that those national mapping tools are in one place, and they can be looked at in conjunction with some of our outcomes. So I think I've, as I say, I've seen a sneak preview of what the outcomes tool will look like, the web-based tool, and colleagues are working on that at the moment. So there'll be a chance to see that next week. And then I'm sure if the governing body would like to see that as it develops, it can come back here. But the most important thing is that it becomes looking at outcomes, talking about outcomes, understanding the determinants of outcomes, and understanding where inequality lies and what to do about it is all part of developing the framework. Thank you.
Thanks, Virginia. Any questions or comments? While people are thinking, if I start off, Virginia, and you may want to bring in some of the CCG team to help with this, but it's just understanding so that there's a wealth of data here. And we've always said that data, or more specifically intelligence, is something that we need to work harder on. So how is this going to fit together? We had some conversations this morning as a governing body around our health and care strategy. We've got this outcomes framework. We're doing population health management work, particularly with Optum. And then we look at, as a CCG, we look at the strategic planning part of the commissioning cycle and the need to feed intelligence into there. So it's just seeking an assurance that these aren't all happening separately, and it's more than just another lot of data to help us feel more informed, but actually there is some proper triangulation between those elements that means that it's all working together, I guess.
Yeah, and I think are you okay with me answering this, Simon? Yep. So I think the thing that's been really good about this is that having had, as Simon says, previous outcomes frameworks which look like, 2 or 3 pages of horrible Excel spreadsheet, what we've done is we've come to this point in development through several different routes coming together. So you mentioned population health management, that's all about outcomes. And it's been the same people working with colleagues very closely on population health management, this outcomes framework, across the CCG, into the STP. It's all come together in a way that I think is an indication of how the system is developing as one. And because of the work we've been doing with frontline PCNs, conversations with clinicians and managers, it enables us to start to develop it in a way that I think people can own. And it has to change. That's really important. It's really important that people say, it would really help me if you could put this in it, or can you do that in a different way? It will become more of an intelligence tool and less about a data tool as people start to use it. And the way that we use outcomes in the health and wellbeing boards is that all of our discussions start with a look at what the outcomes are looking like. You don't leave it to the end of a meeting as an item that everybody is too tired to look at. It actually becomes front and center of what you do, because you then look at how you change your decision making, change your strategic commissioning, change your local provision on the basis of what the data are telling you. And that's a really important journey to go on, and it's one that I think local authorities are very used to doing. And I think the NHS is much more expected to do what it's told to do, what it's being told to do, rather than actually being creative around what the data are showing you. So I think it's a shift of focus, and I think it's about making the whole of the system, not just local authority bit of the system, but the whole of the system, much more focused on what the impact of what we do is.
I think that's really helpful. Sorry, Simon.
So I was just going to say, so we're holding the ring on this and population health management at the strategic commissioning partnership, and we are expecting and will be expecting, as LCPs develop, that they will hold their local outcomes framework and PHM data and work through, as Virginia said, to make some real-time decisions based on the data. So there will be that expectation once LCPs are more mature, but we're holding the ring at the strategic commissioning partnership.
I think that's really helpful. This data is only useful if it's used. And so we've just got to make sure that when we are developing strategies and plans and local responses, that actually this is a useful data source rather than ignored, which is the risk. I'm going to stop now and hand over to Simon Kerr.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So I just wanted to follow up on what Virginia said. So that's why with health, I think it's so important to get the story right about what this can help us with, because sitting at provider level in practice and at PCN and at locality, so often I look at data and I think, well, first of all, it's out of date. Secondly, I don't know what the determinants of good outcomes for this particular measure are. And thirdly, I haven't got any evidence that actually if I do something, it makes a huge difference, or if it makes a positive difference. So I think when we go to health colleagues particularly, we need to be able to describe, this is the data, it's up to date, it is relevant to you, these are the determinants of things that can actually improve these outcomes, and we've got the evidence to back that up. And I think if we go into health fora with that type of language, we'll get much more engagement with them and we'll get much more out of them. But I think so often we present data to them and they say, oh, well, actually it's 2 or 3 years out of date, doesn't feel like that in my world, and therefore it's not relevant.
Sheila. Yeah,
thank you, Chair. Simon's going to tell me off probably for being too pedantic now, but the thing that I think this is great, load of work gone into it, and I guess my 2 points were, first of all, do we think that we've covered transitions, the sort of the 18 to 25? Is that going to be, are we going to be able to pick up trends and outcomes in that age group by splitting it as we have? And the other comment I've made is that virtually all of these things, in fact, are reliant on having a healthy workforce. How are we going to make sure that we monitor the health of the workforce? And by that, I mean things like retention and recruitment rates and so on, as part of this, because, for example, if you have no health visitors, then your take-up of health visitor checks will be much lower. So I guess for me, I think the health of the ICS is so intrinsically linked with the health of our workforce as a whole that I wonder how that's going to be factored in, I suppose. Forgive me, I'm not a statistician at all.
No.
Simon's the workforce lead. That probably is one.
Yeah. So Virginia will come in, I know. Yeah. But I was just going to say, Sheila, that just because we have an outcomes framework doesn't mean we won't be monitoring some of the process issues. So you'll note that constitutional standards are nowhere near here, or some of the mild, and Penny's been having a conversation with me as well about the programme milestones for long-term plan, for example. All of those need to be monitored, as does the workforce retention, recruitment, vacancy factors. This is purely outcomes, not the process measures. The transitions issue, I think, is a good one, and I think we should take that away and consider that.
Yeah, and can I just add to that in fact this is an old version, and category 2 isn't school age anymore, it's young people, and several of the indicators that we've included actually cover the 15 to 24 age group, particularly for that reason. So if you're looking at, for example, the children and young people accessing mental health services, and the one on just having another one, NEET, you can see you've got the age range in higher up into that transition period, so it's not just school age. But as I say, this is part of the continuous development of the tool, and it's already altering, and as it develops, there may be other nationally validated indicators that can go in and would supplement that. And a lot of that depends on the discussion at places like the governing body about, you know, what matters. It's really important that it's talked about, it's discussed, and it changes according to what you want it to tell you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Virginia. Charlotte.
Yeah, I was interested to think about the integration of how we're going to deliver, you know, on some of these outcomes, because a lot of them don't rely on health or just social care, but wider community self-help groups. I'm just thinking about like breastfeeding. We know that, for example, rates are much more improved where there's much more self-help groups. And so I suppose just thinking about the aspirations around, you know, it's great to have all this, and the more we kind of work with it and improve what we're looking at, but just looking at it and analysing it, actually who and how we're going to do it. I suppose the plan around implementation and how that mindset change for both professionals and those who aren't professional working together to deliver this, that's kind of really what interests me on this work.
And I think you've absolutely put your finger on it, Charlotte. None of this can be delivered by the CCG alone. It has to be delivered as part of a system, and it involves building that understanding of what other partners are doing, what other communities are doing to contribute to this. And that's at the core of population health management, is getting that very broad understanding of what everybody's doing and how you make an impact. And you're absolutely right with breastfeeding. You know, peer support is critical, and also public health nursing, also midwives, you know, what's going on in the family, culture, ethnicity. It all goes into the melting pot, and it's really important that we all understand all of those factors, and we don't just come at it from a perspective of, oh, there's one professional group that's supposed to be doing this. It's everybody's responsibility to deliver this.
So I just wonder whether the key things here is we've got the information in front of us, and then you ask the two questions, the why, and then the so what. And if we ask both of those properly, then we should lead to some sort of intelligent evidence-based interventions to try and tackle those. And that's where I think you'll start getting some of those multidisciplinary answers coming through if we do that properly. Yeah.
We switch hats though as well, as Virginia says. So we take a moment to think, okay, this is not, you know, how would I think about this if I wasn't, you know, if I was a nurse, versus how would I think about this if I was a, you know, self-help group, and so on, so that we just take that moment to step back and then consider the different perspectives.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's very helpful. John W.
I was going to say this outcomes framework therefore has a wider appeal, and why it's worth thinking about, you know, making sure it's in the public domain so that other people can look at it and understand what's going on and contribute their ideas at various levels, you know, whether you're talking about PCN or a local authority, district council, a school, a workplace, it doesn't matter, it's all relevant.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Chair. Virginia, I think that's a fantastic start. This is the lifeblood of how a local care partnership will function, and as health moves beyond just blood pressure and bowel movements, sort of right into the wider determinants. As I looked through this, I wondered where housing is, because we know with all of these issues, when they go wrong, that 20 years later, health will have to pick up the pieces. And that's why it's so important that we get this right as a local care partnership with our wider determinants colleagues, I suppose. So I think it's really good. Housing, are there moves to have housing in here anywhere?
We had a discussion about it. If you remember, John, that this is driven by Public Health, NHS and Social Care Outcomes Framework. Yeah. There are housing indicators, and we have looked at them, but they're not currently part of the as in the way that you're describing. They're not currently part of those three outcomes frameworks. There's information. So we've got fuel poverty, yeah, which is often linked to. So that's the amount of money that's the amount of poverty that's created by having to spend large amounts of household income on fuel, yeah, which is often a sign of poor quality housing, poor insulated housing, old housing. So there are outcome indicators in here that will give you a perspective on that. But I think this is the sort of thing that needs to be done probably at a lower level of population, where you can really understand within a given area what the pattern of housing is, and some of the mapping tools that we'll be looking at, which already exist. We should be able to just put a direct link in the web tool so that you can get a pattern of, I mean, there are all sorts of amazing maps that we can link to on this that will show you at that level of detail what type of housing and what condition it's in and all of those things. So there's a nod to it in here, and it probably is something that needs more work.
But this will certainly stimulate a lot of the correct conversations that we need now as part of the prevention framework, so that we are giving people a better quality of life in 10, 20, 30 years time, which we haven't done very well up to this point. So I think this is fantastic.
Thank you.
Andrew, I'm going to let you have the last point on this, and then we'll move on.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to follow John and Graves and say something nice about colleagues. So actually, Virginia, I think this is fantastic, actually, and actually should be the basis of something that we really do engage with the public on. Yep. So we've got great ways, I think, to engage with the public, citizens panel, loads of things. I think this could help us with our quest to get people to take responsibility for their health and well-being and everything else. So I'd love to work with you on this, because I think this could be really something fantastic we take to the public.
Yeah, really good.
Okay.
Paul, can I have last word?
All right then, and then I might have last word after you.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say, Andrew, you won't be able to work with Virginia on it, will you? Because unfortunately, she leaves us very, very soon, doesn't she? So
we're trying to persuade her to stay a bit longer.
Yeah, well, we could all try that. So unfortunately for you, I think you'll have to work with me on it, because I'm for an interim bit. I will be holding the outcomes framework, so being passed over by Virginia. I won't do as good a job, but I will do my best. But yes, we can work on it, Andrew, definitely.
So my last word is that when we were talking earlier about when we get local locality reports or things from our LCPs coming through the governing body, and when we get other things coming through, we need to be seeing this influencing the papers that are coming our way. We need to see that our local plans have taken into account these outcomes frameworks and the things that they're telling them. And so although we won't necessarily say, let's have the outcomes framework coming back to report here, let's, as a governing body, make sure that it is shaping the things that we are seeing coming to us, both at system and at place level. I think that would be a desirable outcome from what we've just been through. So thank you, Virginia. The restoration transformation, a verbal update from Jane before we have a short break.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and I'll keep it brief. So the Phase 3 Restoration Transformation Plan, which is obviously a requirement that was set out for us at the end of July, was submitted on the 5th of October, and a comprehensive submission, obviously reflecting our plans and our trajectories to bring services back online, as we've been doing and have, and obviously to recover in terms of activity levels back to previous year's levels. So we've submitted all of that information, and many thanks to colleagues who've contributed to that. Obviously it covered from workforce, from primary care, or from significant information from our acute colleagues, mental health colleagues, so very comprehensive. That's been submitted, and we've had there's been obviously several meetings over September, discussions, refinements, improvements, trajectories, which obviously were challenged, and we will waiting further feedback in terms of sign off. We've had more detail to come through. Recently, but we're waiting final sign off. But in effect, we're working with our plans and are moving into delivery, irrespective. And that is all overseen by our restoration cell, which John Finn is leading as an overall programme of work. And as I'll talk a little bit later in the finance and in the performance and quality report, talk a little about some of the interventions that are underway to obviously maximise productivity so we can boost our recovery. We'll be reporting through, we talked this through at the performance and quality meeting, we'll be reporting through to that meeting monthly on progress. And there is obviously a programme management approach that John is overseeing to ensure that we are understanding our challenges and our exceptions and taking remedial action as we progress over coming months. So I think I'll probably just stop there. If there's any questions, obviously, hopefully there'll be a fuller report next month once we've had sign off from NHS E&I.
Thanks, Jane. So any questions or comments for Jane? Simon?
Thanks, Jane, very much. Can I just be a little bit challenging? And I know we're in the middle of a very difficult time with the health system, but some of your aspiration targets in that phase 3 plan of less than 100% are kind of almost never going to deliver the target. And maybe we ought to be aspiring to be doing more than 100% of activity that we were doing before.
So thank you, Simon. I think I think first of all, they're not my targets. They're our system targets, and I think what they're obviously nationally it was set at specific levels, 90%, 100%, depending on the modality of treatment. The challenge there, of course, is being able to maximise our capacity in the context of the COVID world we're operating with, as you all well know, in terms of the loss of productivity that we have in relation to IPC requirements, social distancing and such like. That has been particularly the challenge, and these plans are predicated on maximising our capacity in terms of the independent sector as well, particularly in terms of course surgical workload. So it's been a challenge to get to this point. I think I would also say, though, we go back to the outpatients point. In effect, we didn't necessarily want to deliver that level of activity as we've done in the past. We need to cover the backlog, of course, but what we want to do is obviously ensure that we don't follow up people unnecessarily and maximise our use, of course, of all the different mediums to see people in terms of digital options that we have.
Thanks. Judy?
I was going to make a point which Jane has just covered, but I think it is important for all of us to understand that phase 3 is our aspiration and what we really want to achieve, and that the going is still tough because of all the growing numbers of COVID cases. And so, yes, it's great because it will push innovation and creativity and keep us looking at different ways of doing things, but it's just important for us to register the challenges in the system just at the moment.
No, can I just come back on it? I know, absolutely, and touching on that a little bit later. Obviously, I think we're all well cited on the challenge that we have this winter of obviously managing the increasing COVID numbers within hospitals and obviously within the community. The winter pressures, which are always challenging, and then of course we have this major backlog in terms of, particularly in terms of our elective workload. We also have some of the uncertainty. We don't know whether it be an issue or not, but of course we've got to be a weather eye to the potential impact of the EU exit as well. So it's a complex landscape, to say the least, that we're facing this winter. We all want to make sure that we are doing our absolute best as a system to maximise our capacity and deliver across those different requirements, but it will be challenged, and I think that's why the close scrutiny that we'll be doing on this work is really important for John Finn's work. And importantly here, it's how we work together as a system. So although we have trajectories for each organisation, what we know is how we work together through mutual support, mutual aid, to ensure that we are delivering all the capacity that we have can be fully operational all the time, recognising the different issues that will face different providers at different points.
Thank you, Jane. I don't see any more questions. There is something around going through in the conversation in the chats around what we do, just referring back to the outcomes framework. That may be something that we have to think about, what's the most useful role of governing body and the line of sight of those outcomes. but we'll take that away and think about it. But in the meantime, let's have a break. We're running slightly over, but let's give us 30 minutes. Let's come again, start promptly again at 20 to 4, please.
Yeah.
Right, that's 22. So let's get started again. And by my book, that's still running to time. I know there is a certain chair of South Devon Hospital who would be livid if I mentioned 10 minutes late would be running to time because of his naval background, but he's not here, so we're doing fine. Finance report, John.
Thanks, Chair. So reporting on the financial position for the first half of the financial year, a report in the pack starting on page 41, which I'll take as read, but for benefit of any of members of the public listening to the recording, we have been operating the first half of the year under the emergency financial framework that was put in place across the NHS. Essentially to say that the costs of meeting the pandemic, the NHS would get the resources that it needs. For us, that meant we received an interim allocation for the first half of the year, and by a process of retrospective reimbursement, we could claim back any additional costs. The table in section 3 of the report, which is on page 48 of the papers, just demonstrates then that we've spent for the first half of the year about £1.1 billion on the range of health services that we commission. And about 38.5 million of that has been on the direct costs associated with dealing with additional costs driven by the pandemic. More detail, if people are interested to look at that, of what that 38.5 million has been spent on is then set out in section 4 of the report. It broadly splits into two categories. One is around supporting the costs of faster hospital discharge that was put in place as part of the response to the first wave, and a range of other things where we've been supporting services with additional costs of protective equipment and things like that. That's all set out in the report. Where we find ourselves in summary at the end of the first half of the year is that we are 7.5 million in deficit. That 7.5 million represents the amount of reimbursement that we are still awaiting to receive from NHS England, but we have no reason to believe that that won't come through. There is usually a time delay in claim and receipt of the actual funding, so I would be fully confident that we'll get the 7.5 million and we will get to the half-year point with a break-even position. For the second half of the year, which I'll start to report on at the next governing body meeting, we'll then exit that particular financial framework and we'll have a fixed allocation for the remainder of the year. And as I say, Paul, I'll report against that for the remainder of this year at future governing body meetings. Nothing else to bring to attention, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you, John. Any questions or comments for John on that finance position? So Judy, is that an old or new hand? Oh, that's an old hand. Okay. John, can I just ask then, while people are pondering this, so that sort of level of that sort of position and therefore the extra funding that we've received, is that compared with our comparator CCGs, is that roughly in line with the extra expenses that other areas of the country are seeing? Or are we, in a position where Devon has been before, where we seem to be out of kilter?
Not out of kilter at all, Paul. No, I would say that the financial framework that we're currently operating in is it's quite different to where we have been previously, where, as you know, we get an allocation which is based on a share of the national funding for the NHS, which is deemed to be right for our population. Where we are at the moment is much more responding to the level of expenditure that's currently in place on services. That's why it feels quite different this year to how it has done previously, where I would have been talking at governing body about quite challenging financial circumstances. To some extent, we're protected from that for a year as a result of the strange circumstances we find ourselves in.
And I guess so our COVID costs are comparable. I know we've got a Nightingale which a lot of other CCGs haven't, but if you take that out of the equation, they're comparable to what's being spent across the country on excess costs due to COVID, are they?
They are broadly comparable, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. David.
Yeah, thanks. John, the question would just be, it would be helpful for me to know what's the underlying deficit. So when we go into next year, how would you estimate our financial position was at the beginning of the next financial year? I appreciate because of the COVID, we're not carrying forward a deficit, but I'm presuming there's an underlying structural deficit as we start the next year, just in order to give us an understanding of the job we have to do in terms of cost savings for next year.
Yeah, certainly, David. So you'll remember in the normal period before the start of the pandemic, we were working through, as we would do in any year, our operational planning, and at that point we were looking at an underlying deficit for the CCG of in the region of about £43 million. And to achieve that, we were needing to deliver about 20 odd £million worth of savings and efficiencies. So quite a significant challenge even to get to the 43. Obviously, with the impact of the pandemic, there will be some ongoing impact on services. I think the increased need for infection protection and control measures, things like that, which are likely to have added to that. So we've got a combination of, we won't have made the progress as we would have wanted to on some of the savings and efficiencies because we've had to divert all of our effort into dealing with the impact of the pandemic. But we're also likely to see some instances where service costs have been increased. So I think it's quite likely that that underlying position will have got worse if there's been no change to the allocation for the population, and that last bit is quite significant, and we simply don't know what the answer to that will be. So part of the job for us working with NHS England and Improvement is to say to what extent will our allocation for the population have changed to take into account some of the ongoing impact that I've just talked about. Probably the last bit of the jigsaw which I would talk about, which we need to make an assessment of, is I've talked about some things where I think it's reasonable to expect that the cost of providing services will have gone up. In some cases, there may be some savings and efficiencies from changes to the way we deliver services that have been accelerated to some extent by the impact of the pandemic. So things like remote consultation and that sort of thing. But we just need to work all that through. I think the note of caution that I would put in, though, is that 43 million that I talk about, that is very likely to still be the size of the position for the CCG. And as we know, if you look across the wider Devon system, it's a bigger number than that.
Thanks, John. I think it's just really helpful not to forget that underlying deficit is still there.
Yeah, absolutely agree, David. Yeah.
James.
Yes, thank you, Chair. John, there's been shown an increase in running costs, and I suspect some, as has been mentioned, is down to COVID. But given the savings that should be being made on running costs in terms of expenses, perhaps even lighting and heating for buildings, how have those panned out? Why is it that we're still increased running costs?
Thanks, James. So important to say that running costs haven't increased year on year, so there's some variation against plan showing an increase in the second half of the year in comparison to the first, but we haven't increased running costs this year in comparison to last year. In fact, we'll probably see a slight reduction, largely in the case of the CCG, actually linked to reduced travel costs. You know, we're not incurring anything like the amount of costs as we did previously. We are also looking as we start to look towards next year about other savings and efficiencies that we can get out of running costs, for instance, from thinking about what's the impact of home working on our ongoing requirement for office accommodation, things like that. So we'll definitely work that through as part of 21-22, but important to say in this year we haven't increased costs year on year.
So John, just on that, just because it appears so, because it's the actual spend is greater than the budget. It's just that the budget was set. Then is that case based on a saving that we would make on the running costs, not based on our last year's spending?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that's why it looks greater when actually
sorry, I'm probably overplaying it now. It's a variation against the budget, but if you look at what we're spending, it hasn't changed. It's no more than we were spending last year.
Okay, that's really helpful. That's nice and clear. Thank you. Nick Kennedy.
Thank you. So, John, two things. The first, just to be clear, then the discussions with NHS England improvements about next year's budget is going to be an iterative process where we will be able to explain why some of our costs may have gone up or what we're spending has changed, and you think that we will be able to make a case for why we need whatever. That's the first question. The second one is just around the increased COVID spending. What controls have we got in place to ensure that that's all kosher, if you like, and that it's all reasonable expenditure?
Yes. So on what's being incurred at the moment, Nick, we run our own checks on where it's a claim for reimbursement. We've got our own processes that we run for that. We're also subject then to some spot checks from NHS England and Improvement, and actually across the country there are some retrospective audits taking place on those just to give some assurance for organisations and more generally about that. The difficult thing for everybody in there is, you know, we can't see necessarily what the recurrent impact of that is going to be into 21-22, because we don't quite know where we're going to be in terms of the impact of dealing with the disease. But that is what we need to continue to work with them about. Is there going to be any recognition on a recurrent basis that some of these are permanent changes and are likely to be there for the foreseeable? And that's the bit we just need to keep working on.
But we'll be able to make our case for that, presumably, rather than just having it imposed on us.
We'll be able to influence it. Ultimately, it will be a decision that's taken, and I think it's reasonable to expect that the broad picture will return to, we'll get a share of the national cake, if you will. We just don't know how much the size of the national cake will have changed.
Okay, thanks.
So thanks, John, for presenting that. I guess when we are having to deal with so much around COVID and so much of that challenge, it is helpful that the financial framework that we've been in the last 6 months has been supportive of that rather than being a restraining factor. But thank you for making sure that we have those numbers in front of us so that we are, we're transparent and we know what's going on with our finances, even though we have what feels like a bit of a cushioned environment to operate in, so that we can get on with those important, clinical and operational priorities. So thank you for doing that. Okay, so it is Darren and Jane on to 8.2, which is the performance and quality report.
Okay, thank you. Is there an echo there? Hello, thank you. I'll kick off and then Darren join in.
It's fine, Jane.
Yeah.
Sorry, just a bit of an echo. Okay, so obviously this report covers the constitutional standards for the period up to the end of August and for some up to the end of September. So conscious that obviously time has moved on for that point. I'm just really going to highlight some of the key areas here. So obviously in terms of cancer weights, we have held our position really on the 62-day target overall. There was a particular variation between providers, where we particularly have slipped in relation to a continual ongoing issue around the 2-week wait, and that reflects obviously the rise in numbers in terms of demand, which obviously is a positive in terms of people having the confidence to come into for assessment, but obviously also a product of issues around staffing levels, sickness, and particularly access to diagnostic pathways, which I'll say a little bit more about shortly. So that is still an area of focus, and that is an ongoing challenge. In terms of the elective situation, so we obviously understand the COVID first wave, the challenge that's put in terms of creating a backlog in relation of long waiters, and you'll see from the tables on page 5 of the report, page 65 of the board pack, the breakdown of those long waiter positions. We've seen obviously the rise of over 52-week waits increase circa 800 month on month from July to August, and that's a trend that we is continuing into September as well in terms of the early data, and that in terms of the case mix of those long waiters, the majority are orthopedics and ophthalmology, reflecting in large measure our demographics of the population that we serve. So there's a significant obviously focus in relation to, under the surgical restoration programme, looking at those specialties, how we can maximise our existing capacity, productivity in terms of numbers of cases per list, and there's a programme of work supported by GIRF, the National Programme of Getting It Right First Time, which is actually looking to compare and contrast, working with clinicians to see how we can improve the productivity in terms of numbers of procedures per list, for example. So an extensive piece of work there, as well as obviously all providers looking to maximise the capacity they have available in terms of weekend working, independent sector use, etc. So that is, I think, our major challenge, and of course where potential risk is in terms of potential harm. And so what we have to do is to ensure that we've got good validation processes. There's quite there's a major national push on waiting list validation, and that is really fundamental in terms of making sure that are minimising risk. And I think, Darren, do you want to come in a little bit more about the work that's been undertaken on that?
Yeah, thanks, Jane. So we've been working across the system. Obviously, I think Jane's alluded previously to a system-wide PTL, but we're working very much now across the system in terms of understanding risk stratification, particularly at P1, which is the priority 1 through to priority 4, and a consistent approach all of our providers to make sure that we are consistently doing that risk stratification but not relying very heavily, as we've done in the past, in terms of harm reviews, but this is far more around being proactive rather than measuring harm at the end of a patient journey. So that has been adopted across the system, and is being piloted in a couple of specialities in South Devon as we speak, and then we'll roll out further. Thank you.
Diagnostics, obviously, as regularly reported, it's been a challenged area for us for some time pre-COVID. Continues to be in terms of our performance against, as we not alone across the country, against the national target. We're at 61.1% against the national 99% 6-week target. Where there obviously this is a major focus around looking at particular modalities such as CT, MR, endoscopy, where obviously they are critical in terms of the cancer pathway. And there's the focus of the Adapt and Adopt programme of work.
Jane, I know you're trying to get your microphone in the right position, but it's picking up. If it goes a little bit lower, try that and just see if we can hear you more clearly.
Okay, thank you. The Adapt and Adopt programme.
That's much better, thank you.
The Adapt and Adopt programme is the national programme that has also been rolled out locally in terms of being able to ensure we've got the scrutiny and the capacity in place to support the diagnostics. So we've referred to earlier to the additional capability that the Nightingale Hospital has given us whilst on standby in terms of CT, MR most recently, and plans around endoscopy. But that we've seen some good progress in a number of areas, particularly in relation to CT and catching up on backlogs. But obviously, with the current pressures, it's important that we keep in that focus to deliver that improvement on that key, on those key modalities. What I've listed in the report, and we had a very full discussion at the Finance and Performance Committee earlier this month, was what's really important is, one thing is to have the numbers, what our performance is, but the most important point, of course, is what are we doing collectively as a CCG and collectively as a system to make improvement. So a number of those interventions, I've mentioned a couple already, are listed in the report, which is focused on enhanced capacity, improving productivity, as well as such initiatives, for example, of proactively encouraging patient-initiated follow-ups. So we manage that, manage to ensure that we give more patient control about the need for follow-up rather than routine follow-ups, that obviously capacity could be better used to see new patients. So there are a whole range of initiatives. So I think in terms of the urgent care, if I just briefly say, so the report here relates to the position in September, and we obviously were below the national 4-hour target, but better than the English position. But of course, behind that high level number is a range of different positions across our acute providers. UHP have been particularly challenged and have had some 12-hour breaches. I'll bring in Darren at this point.
Yeah, so we've had 9 12-hour breaches in the Western system. We've done a review of those end to end, and we've, from initial reviews, we found no harm. However, the GERFT, so the Get It Right First Time, I've also done a review into the Western urgent care system. So we're just waiting on the report to come out to do some triangulation in terms of any potential medium or long-term harm, which they will help us with in terms of triangulation. We continue to work with our colleagues in Cornwall and Kernow CCG to do some deep dive triangulation and working with Lenny as the chief nurse to make sure that we can continue to triangulate any impacts, not just in terms of the 12-hour breaches, but those medium breaches, particularly from 4 hours to 12 hours, where we are seeing potentially further harm, which we're not seeing in the 12-hour trolley breaches.
And similarly, the challenges around the ambulance handovers. I mean, obviously, there's a figure in this report which was an improvement on August, but obviously a significant amount of lost hours in terms of delays in ambulance handovers, 288 shown here. The vast majority of that being UHP. So I think it just is a reflection of the challenges in that system, and obviously the work that Darren's described is underway to try to manage those challenges. Obviously, since that time, the COVID activity obviously has responded to those challenges that colleagues are facing, and we're doing what we can to support and work together as a system to mitigate those pressures. I probably would hand over to Darren now for the quality.
Thanks, Jane. So I think you've probably covered the main points. I think the only other things just to bring governing bodies to attention to, that we continue to obviously see challenges around 111 and out of hours. But having said that, and considering our continued focus and support with Devon doctors, that I think we are now seeing the workforce starting to pay dividends, the increase in workforce, and actually improvements in potentially call abandonments, and that ultimately then is a reduction in comfort calling and callbacks as well. So although it is early days in terms of those particular areas, there are definitely some early signs of improvements, particularly in the 111 out of hours. And then finally, three things for me. We mentioned last time at the governing body, particularly around continuing healthcare. Those plans have now been through the executive team and approved, and we have now clear lines of reductions in terms of our outstanding as a result of COVID back to the end of the financial year, and we're already ahead of those trajectories. So improving picture from that point of view, and good from a patient outputs point of view. SI, so serious incidents, continue to see an improving picture. We are also looking at the yellow card process to make sure that continues or improves to add value. and I can do some updates, particularly in that area at the next governing body. I think the other thing to note is that where we've reported previously around the delays in SI investigations at Devon Partnership Trust, those have significantly improved. The quality has also improved, and what we're now seeing is really good confidence that they will meet the trajectory by the end of November, so with no further overdue SIs at that stage. And then finally, for me, I think the big focus as we move, well, now we're in the second wave of COVID, is significant input, significant support from the IPC perspective. So our team is working very closely with the NHSE team, have been supporting site visits, and we will increase our ability to do site visits and look at COVID secure elements to make sure that we maintain patient safety through the winter. I think we have continued to see outbreaks which are linked to asymptomatic positive patients, which is becoming quite challenging, but working very much with all our providers around that particular area. And then finally, flu vaccine uptake has been much higher this year. Obviously, we are continuing to see that program, the extended program, roll out. We know there have been some supply issues with vaccines because of the increased uptake, but we are now able to draw down from the national stockpiles to help us in terms of those particular areas. So those flows should now start to be unlocked as of last week. So an improving picture as well. Happy to take any questions.
And also, can I just one aspect I forgot to highlight in the report, which actually wasn't in the finance and performance report that we discussed, was just really to note the progress in relation to the trajectory for children with LD autism in inpatient care. So in essence, we're ahead of ourselves in terms of our trajectory. It's set at 10 and currently 5 to 6. So it's to recognise the achievement of the team to achieve that, because that's a big improvement to where it was before. And I think we probably all can relate to the importance to ensuring that children are in the home setting supported rather than in an inpatient facility.
Thank you both. Darren, can I just ask, because there were a few acronyms that came through there. So IPC, Infection Prevention and Control,
yep,
and then you talked about the single patient list. You used, was it PTL?
Yeah, so a wider single patient list.
Okay, that's fine. So so I will just, we will all get into the habit of explaining acronyms when we use them in our public meetings. I think that will just be a helpful habit for us to get into. So sorry, Darren, if I'm picking on you. We probably all have done a little bit of that today. Simon.
Thank you both. So Jane, there's a number of those constitutional performance standards that I noticed the RD&E are really not doing very well at, and perhaps the one that's drawn my attention to it is time and the type 1 A&E activity, which seems to be going off quite some way in the RD&E, and that's untypical of them, because they used to be really the sort of shining light for 4-hour waits at the RD&E. There are a number of other targets. Detox, delayed transfers care is climbing up quite quickly, and diagnostics still not very good. Do we think that the RD&E are surviving this COVID season as well as the other providers, and are they providing so much help to North Devon that they are struggling to maintain their own system?
I think I don't think I can give a sort of an absolute answer either way in that regard. I think that they're challenged, just like all the trusts are, in terms of responding to the COVID environment. Obviously, the flows through ED and the separate pathways in terms of for COVID, potential COVID and non-COVID patients, etc. All of that for all the ED departments is obviously is slowing things down in terms of patient reviews, etc. They've got particular challenges, obviously, in terms of their waiting list, as others do as well. So I don't think I can draw a conclusion. We do know, we look forward in the next few months, we look next month, at performance. We've obviously had the implications of their MyCare implementation as well. That will be a factor, because obviously that went live earlier this month. Where they, and obviously so that basically MyCare is a replacement of their patient administration system, the complete replacement of our whole electronic patient record system. which was very extensive, and we know to achieve that they've had to obviously curtail activity. So I think I'm looking forward, I'm expecting some of those figures will potentially have got deteriorated because of that implementation, but that was planned. I think we can next month dig in a little bit deeper into these performance areas in the context of the interventions that we're doing and the focused areas of improvement. But I think that has to be obviously positioned in the context of the environment of the moment of managing COVID and the winter pressures.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And John, and then Sheila.
Thanks, Darren. Can I just ask a question on the 111 performance? And really what the paper there is saying that 1 in 5 people who ring up 111 give up. And then later on we say no harm has been reported by the provider, which actually my view is that's not good enough, I suppose. I presume all these phone calls, the phone number is recorded. And have we made any attempt to ask people or to commission a service where we phone back maybe 1 in 4, 1 in 5 of those phone numbers and say what actually happened? Because actually we don't know whether there's any harm or not. We just report that no harm has been reported. So is there a better way to assure ourselves that this is not a service which is in real trouble?
Yeah, thanks, John. So I think that's an absolute fair challenge. So I think what we can say is probably 2 sides to this that we're working on. So we are meeting with Devon Doctors on a weekly basis at the moment around a number of their performance indicators, but also in terms of their wider CQC improvement plans. So there is a real focus, because actually what we want to do is to get that call abandonment number down very low in the first place. Get that call answering below the 60 seconds, absolutely clear. So we've done a significant amount of investment working with them to get more individuals on board to get that element working. So that's where we're starting to see some improvements. What we're also doing through the performance meetings is also doing that exact element, is now starting to work back and actually undertaking a number of surveys of individuals who potentially have abandoned a call, or potentially so identifying where we can get to in terms of particularly where those individuals ended up, so where they went to if they didn't get the outcome from DDoS. Yeah. Did they go back to primary care? Did they go to the front door of an ED? I'd say at the moment it's very early days to actually really get a real level of granularity around what that really means. But that's a piece of work that we're working on with Devon Doctors as it stands at the moment, and they are being really supportive around how we do that together.
So I think that's quite urgent, because the 111, this is an increasing part of how we manage flow throughout the system, and particularly out of hours and the weekend. So with a national figure of being around 10% abandonment, it could be that all of those patients abandoned because they then dial 999, and we wouldn't know. So I think this is actually something we really want to be all over like a rash, and try and find out as quickly as possible just what is going on here, because we've looked at these figures for many months now, and they've crept up. And for me, having a meeting, deciding to do something is probably, we need to be a little bit more robust about this.
Yeah. Noted.
So Darren, just to make sure that that's followed through, it sounds as though it's something that should come through to Quality Committee, but presumably there are regular updates in there around the sort of thing that the unintended consequences of that poor performance. So can we ask, when we next have a quality chairs report, that we have a highlight of where we're at with 111, and whether you've managed to uncover any of those issues that John has raised?
Yes, absolutely, Chair. That's fine.
Great, thanks, Darren.
I'm aware I'm doing that in Glynis's absence, but Darren, if you can take that up with her, that would be really helpful. Sheila, and then Graham, and then we will move on to the next item.
Thank you, Paul. So just a question really about the IAPT target. So we've got the recovery target, recovery rate with Live Well sagging, their performance deteriorated, and then looking at the IAPT waiting times, whereas Live Well are doing okay. But what strikes me in both of those charts is that DPT's performance has been very stable. and Live Well's has been quite erratic, and I think we need to understand why that is. And I speak particularly having done quite a lot of work a few years ago when I was mental health lead in the Western locality around the IAT recovery rates with Live Well. And I think we need to do we understand why they're not recovering, in particular the recovery rate, sorry to use the same word, and why their performance is so erratic, notwithstanding a pandemic, because we can't blame the pandemic, because DPT have managed to stay stable.
I can't answer that one, but we'll happily go away and look into that, Sheila. I don't know whether Jo had any comments you wanted to make on it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's a good question, Sheila. I don't know off the top of my head why it's so erratic at the moment. We have had, and you know, because you've been involved as well before, we have had problems before with Live Well recovery rate, and it's been particularly around the conversations we've had before have been particularly around the cohorts and also staffing levels as well. So obviously I'm conscious that the staffing levels will be smaller in Live Well, so it can be more erratic. But I think I can't give you a definitive answer, so I think we should take it away and bring it back next time.
Thanks, Jo. Graham.
Thank you. Just briefly back to the 111 service. Just wanted to support all that you said about some of the difficulties there. The only doubt I've got about ringing people back to find out what happened to their call is about patient confidentiality and ringing back a telephone number, and it might well be another family member who answers, who's got no idea that their partner or child or whoever has rung 111. So I just wonder if we'd have to be careful about that and patient confidentiality. And I guess secondly, and not intended to be entirely flippant, if we've got time for people to ring back and say, sorry, we didn't answer your call, what was the problem? You kind of just wish they'd pick the phone up in the first place.
Yes. Well, let's leave Darren to work through with the quality team what the best approach might be to try and uncover some of the outcomes of the performance. But I think that's relevant. There is a confidentiality thing there of whether they used a communal phone number to make that call and the implications of that. I think that's a fair point. Okay, just before, can I just one thing, Jane, just on I don't want us to get accused of spin, because one of the things you said is better than the national position. Our A&E performance is better than the national position because we're not measuring UHP. And UHP, if we are right in our assumption, is our worst performer. I would be quite surprised if we were better than the national position if we were actually measuring it. So I guess it's just clarity that it may well be a statistical anomaly rather than demonstrating that Devon is doing better than the rest of the country.
Yeah, and a fair comment. And also, I think the rest of the country isn't doing amazingly well either. So I think it's absolutely fair comment.
Thank you. Thanks, Jane. Thanks for presenting that, Jane and Darren. So we are then on to a couple of governance issues. Ginny, do you want to take us through 9.1 and 9.2? That's right.
Yep, our health and safety policy is coming to the governing body for sign off as one of our statutory policies. It's coming as a regular update, which we do on an annual basis, but obviously this year has been a slightly bigger job than normal, as we've incorporated the measures that we're taking to manage our workplaces in terms of the pandemic. So part of that is around actually making sure that our workplaces are COVID secure, and although there's not a lot of detail on that in this policy, it's underpinned by a huge amount of detailed governance guidance and protocols for staff in terms of what they need to do when they come into the office. But we've also added into the policy our arrangements around working at home and making sure that staff know what they need to do to make sure that their workplace when that's at home is safe, and lone working. We've also revised our instant reporting procedures since we last produced this policy, so that's incorporated in here as well. So very happy to take any questions on that.
Thanks very much, Ginny. And the So the changes are highlighted in red. So I guess rather than trying to go through the whole document, it may be helpful if people have queries about the changes that are coming around this time around. Sheila.
Yeah, I just wondered, sorry Ginny, this might not be directly related to this paper, but I just wondered, given that we are asking people if they can stay at home, that they can come in if their mental health would benefit from it, or their well-being rather. I wonder what proportion of staff are choosing to take us up on that offer?
It's relatively low at the moment. I haven't got the figures in front of me, but we do log that. So anyone that's coming into the office has to complete a form, speak to their manager about that, get that sign off, and then that comes into the health and safety team to log that so that we can make sure that the appropriate precautions are being taken and that staff have the equipment they need and all those sorts of things. So I can get you those numbers. It's very low. With the exception of DRSS, who are still working. I think they're sort of half and half in office and at home. The amount of other staff that are coming in to do that is quite small.
Thanks, Ginny.
And Sheila, I'm here in County Hall because it's half term and trying to do a whole day meeting and expect the choir to do it at home is probably unreasonable with 3 teenagers. But actually, I've seen 4 people in County Hall offices in the annex today, so the numbers are still very small. Okay, so I've not got any other questions, so we need to approve this. So, oh, John, I have got a question. Muted question at the moment.
15.1. The use of handheld mobile phone whilst driving is not encouraged. I thought it was that was completely illegal. 15.1.
So, so John, interestingly, I read in it's interesting that it's currently. I'm going to be careful how I quote it, but it was in the news that it's illegal to communicate using a mobile phone. But it's not at the moment illegal to use sat-nav or to set your playlist, which is one of those anomalies that they're trying to correct.
I think the police would claim that you are distracted and not paying due attention to driving. And I was worried about 15.1. That was all. I think it's.
Yeah, no. I think it's. I'm just saying it's probably not the legal thing, but Jenny, maybe we can just.
We'll check the wording on
that.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Jenny.
Okay, and then in which case, are we happy to approve it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's general nods. Ginny, thank you very much. That one's approved. EPRR.
So this is our paper on the EPRR assurance process, which we undertake every year. But this year it's been a much more light touch process. So this is about assurance on the CCG's arrangements for EPRR, but we also have a responsibility working on behalf of NHS England to provide assurance for our commissioned provided services. This year we have, as you'll see from the paper, we have a statement from the accountable emergency officer of each of those organisations to say that they are compliant with those standards. Most years it is quite a large exercise. It's sort of half a day with each of those organisations going through all the details of that. So this is a significant change. However, what I would say in terms of assurance is that we are working much more closely with those EPRR leads than we have ever done before. So we are making sure that arrangements are in place on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, we have incident management in place on an ongoing basis. And we've also, as you will see from the CCG's statement, recognised that we haven't been significantly tested in terms of COVID, although it may not have felt like that at some point. So we have undertaken an additional exercise this month to make sure that our processes are robust if we had to deal with a much higher level of incidents than we have done. So this paper has come to the governing body for your approval.
Nick Kennedy, you've got a question.
Yeah, Jenny, thank you. So the paper asks us to approve all the organisations are as compliant as they say they are, but all we've got obviously is their self-assessment. We can clearly, for the CCG we can approve or not, but for the others, are we just taking it on trust, or can you assure us that or are you assured that what they're saying is accurate enough for us to be able to take that on trust?
I can provide you with my assurance. I'm sure that we can get more documentary evidence if you need that. I think what normally happens is it's a process that we do once a year, and we go in and spend half a day with each of the trusts and look at what they've been doing. This year, our EPRR leads are meeting together on, I think it's a fortnightly basis, if not a weekly basis, to go through and make sure that everything is in place and everybody is doing what they need to do. So I would actually have a lot more confidence this year than I would normally do, that we've got everything in place that we need to do, and because we've been through the process of actually testing an awful lot on an ongoing basis, rather than it just being a kind of a theoretical, have you got the paperwork in place?
Oh, that's reassuring. Thank you.
Okay, so Ginny, we're asked to note and to approve the position on the statement. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So any objections to that? So all is quiet. So we will take that as approved. Thank you very much. Thanks, Ginny.
Thank you.
So we've got the committee chairs report. So we've got 4 committee chairs reports to go through. We've talked about quality. Glynis isn't here. Darren, is there anything from that report that you want to raise? Sorry, Sheila.
I'm really sorry, Paul, and forgive me if this is just a terrible question, but we've had to respond to a pandemic. 2 years ago, we had significant severe weather conditions. Are we confident that we've stress tested all of these plans against more than one significant threat at a time, given that we're approaching winter?
Hi, I can answer that one. It's been the subject of a regional exercise, which was held in September, where all of those factors were tested at the same time.
Thanks, Virginia.
Okay. All right. So in Glynis's absence, Darren, is there anything you want to highlight from the report?
Thanks, Chair. So I'll take the report as read. There's just 2 things just really for the note of the minutes, really. One is that we make reference in the paper to Devon Partnership Trust and the Quality Surveillance Group, and also just to give the governing bodies assurance that we continue to work on a monthly basis with exec to exec, which includes the quality assurance elements there. And because it's not quite clear in the minutes of the governing body paper or the QAC paper. And then the second point is that we had a presentation around autism spectrum disorders. A number of the governing body attended, and we have made recommendations to continue conversations with the commissioning committee around potential gaps, and myself and Joe are working on that. So just to give the governing bodies assurance on that.
Thanks very much, Darren. Commissioning committee is chaired by Claire Hooper, but Nick Kennedy, as a member of that committee, you're the link into governing body. The report highlights the decisions that were made within the committee. Anything you want to bring to our attention?
Well, yeah, thank you, Paul. There's one thing. The meeting on the 23rd, we just wanted to make governing body aware that we asked for some legal advice around the process of additional funding in education settings for children with additional health needs, a very complicated area, which we are trying to, there's a whole process going on deciding how to fund that in future. But at the moment, the funding, we are funding some of those, but there are questions about how we should fund it and what we should do. And this was looked at by the executives about a year ago, I think, there was a question about whether legal advice about the whole process should be taken, which it wasn't. But we thought that a decision around individual assessments of children who may need funding was probably the best way to go as an interim measure until a new process was in place. But in order to do that, we thought that it would be best to get some, we took advice that it would be a good idea to get legal advice on how to do that. And it's going to come back to the committee in November with that legal advice and to allow us to make a decision.
Thanks very much, Nick. Any questions for Nick? Can I just mention one discussion that I thought was quite helpful in the committee was there was a question in the committee as how and when should they be escalating things to governing body? And I thought it'd be helpful just to relay that just so that there's a mutual understanding of what that process might look like. The situation we described was that the decisions that are being made in the committee are within the delegated powers of the execs who are members of that committee, and that escalation would be if either the committee felt that the decision went beyond those powers, or there were significant implications for that decision for the wider system that the governing body needed to be aware of, or the decision was particularly difficult or contentious that it was felt that it couldn't be made within that committee, and then those commissioning decisions would be escalated to governing body. And so that's how that committee will operate in its decision-making process. It's not an assurance committee, it's purely around those decisions to escalate when it's appropriate. Thanks, Nick. So, Finance Committee, Graham, anything to highlight from you?
Yes, please, Paul. Virginia helpfully pointed out earlier that when we get to this time of the meeting, we sometimes don't give things the attention they deserve. And 2 meetings ago in August, I was guilty of that. I brought a report which had some new terms of reference for the Finance Committee attached to it and forgot to ask governing body to actually approve them. So they're back round again for a second time. They haven't changed since August. The changes then were to add the Chief Operating Officer and to increase the number of non-exec directors from 2 to 3. This time I need to specifically ask governing body please to approve those. The second thing I just want to draw attention to, and it sort of highlights back to the discussion we had at agenda item 8, where David Greenwell asked a really good question about the financial position and the position we're in this year and what it might be as we go into next year. So what we did at the last Finance Committee was to pick up again the report from the NHSEI, the Independent Financial Report that we sometimes colloquially call the Mapson Report. And we just refreshed ourselves again on what that had to say and came up with 3 decisions, which are towards the end of my report. The first of those is that we really want to call upon the system again to restart a process to put in place a credible financial plan for the system. This was started back in March, but then paused because of COVID. The second decision was, notwithstanding asking the system to do that, we as a CCG have a clear leadership role and should be picking up that ourselves, whether or not the system chooses to do so. And thirdly, I think we wanted to sort of just reflect the fact that this can't just be looking at finance and finance recovery. We've had a lot of discussion today about operational issues, about future commissioning intentions and so on. And we would hope that we could wrap all that together into, I think, what I've called in the report, an integrated action plan rather than just a finance plan. Again, I wanted to just draw that to your attention. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Graham. So on that last point, any questions for Graham, and then we can go to the terms of reference. Okay, so then we need to approve those terms of reference. Comments either in writing or vocal, otherwise I would assume that we have approval of those. Great, approved. Thank you very much, Graham. And then Judy, Primary Care Committee, anything to bring our attention to?
Sorry. I just wanted to draw people's attention to the thing that's on the bottom of the first page, the draft quality assurance early warning system, and take people back to the incident that was about a year ago when a practice was closed. And we have been working hard between primary care and the quality teams, I say, the staff have, to work on developing a system that will enable us to be better alerted if there is an practice that needs support. So we had a presentation on this. At the moment, it's a little bit about gathering lots and lots and lots of information, but it's a fabulous progress, delayed a bit by COVID. And the business intelligence and quality teams are doing more work on it with primary care involved to make it more flexible for us to use appropriately. But I just wanted people to know progress had been made on that.
Thanks, Judy. Thanks. That's really useful. And I think that will put us in better position to be a bit more cited and therefore more proactive should some of these issues arise, which they undoubtedly will at some point in the future. Any questions or comments for Judy? Okay, well then let's do our tour around the patch and let's start in the north. John.
Yes, thank you, Chair. No, nothing to add really. Just the risk is a sort of summary of what I think we talked about today, which is the triple whammy of COVID, winter pressures, and maintaining elective activity as per the plan we submitted. So that's going to be a challenge. Same for all the areas, and it's there as a formal risk.
Thank you, John. Any questions or comments for John?
Just to make sure that that was the correct use of contiguous. That was my one question for the board.
Sorry, what was that? Sorry, John?
Was that the correct use of contiguous? That's all I would ask. I think it is underneath the risk, but I think it is.
Okay. Right. Oh, contiguous. Yes.
I think it is correct. I'm just teasing you.
Okay. Okay, let's go to the east. Simon.
Thanks, Paul. So much of the work that we're doing is well described in the paper. I guess I'd draw your attention to the nice little circular diagram in the middle that Tim Golby briefed us on a month or so ago, and just highlight that we carry on with our Eastern Locality Delivery Group, looking at those various topics, which is a good format for bringing together clinicians from secondary and primary care and local authority to talk about those issues. And we had a good presentation from Simon Jones, Dr. Simon Jones, who is a STP prevention lead last week. We also had another reinvigorated Eastern Locality Forum meeting last week, which was re-establishing some of those links that we had several months ago. And I think we're beginning to formulate what that Eastern Locality Forum will do in a more clear way, which I can probably report back next month to you. I would also want to just let you know we're planning on re-engaging with our GP practices. We've got 47 GP practices in the east of Devon. We've got a meeting planned to do something virtual with them in early December, breaking them out into 3 different working forums and then bringing them back together for discussions about what's going on in their various areas and trying to engage them with what's going on at system level as much as locality level. So I think pretty much everything else and all the sort of operational stuff is described there. There's some work going on to re-establish a leg ulcer service in Eastern Devon, which is urgently needed. We discussed that at the commissioning committee this week, and I suspect everything else is pretty much self-explanatory there, Paul.
Thank you, Simon. Any questions for Simon? Okay, and then we continue our clockwise tour down to the south. David.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to highlight 2 things. The first is an area where I think we've lagged a bit behind the rest of Devon, which is the LCP development. I just wanted to reassure you that LCP is moving forward. Matt's doing quite a good job of transforming the South Devon huddle into the LCP delivery group meeting, which is now meeting jointly with the executive. So I just wanted to reassure you that where we've lagged behind, we're now hopefully catching up a little bit. The second thing I just wanted to mention was that in the public consultation, which we'll hear more about next time we meet, we spent a lot of time talking about the fact that the consultation was not about buildings, it was about a model of care. And so you'll notice that a lot of what's in our locality update is about the model of care. Just highlight 3 examples of that: the Frailty Partnership Group, Fracture Prevention Service and Urgent Community Care are all parts of that model of care. And so just really wanted to reassure you that all the talk about the consultation being about a model of care rather than buildings is supported by the work that's going on. Thanks.
I think that's really helpful to have that continuous narrative, David, and to set it out like that in the report, reflecting the rhetoric that we are pursuing in the consultation is really valuable. Thank you. Any questions for David? And then over to the West, Sheila.
Yes, thank you, Paul. I will take the report as read. I haven't really got anything additional to add. I will just highlight, because it came to governing body last month, that the ICP, the work on the ICP procurement, the due diligence work is continuing, and also wanted to highlight that the fair shares work is also continuing, and there have been some good proposals that are in the process of being worked up but are not yet finalised. So I think I'll leave it at that, really.
All right, thanks, Sheila. Any questions for Sheila?
Right.
No, thank you.
I just highlight, Paul, sorry, you mentioned, Sheila, there an issue about PCNs not being able to recruit additional staff. That's a shared problem in the eastern locality. We're getting all this money theoretically in PCNs to recruit additional roles, and those additional roles are going to be key to us being able to deliver what we're expected to deliver, but we can't get the people, and that's a problem in the east, and it's obviously an issue for you in the west as well. So it's all very well being able to have the money and being told you can get going on new work, but if we haven't got the people to do it, it's quite difficult.
I think it's a national problem actually, but there's a couple of areas where it's particularly become highlighted to me in the last few weeks.
I see Joe's got her hand up. There may be an initial discussion here, Joe, but I wonder whether some of the things that the team are looking at will be worth exploring within the primary care committee. But do you want to come in at this stage?
Yeah, I won't add too much, but there is, so we've got Joe Stewart back with us now post having been redeployed. So Joe's back with us working 3 days a week on the workforce part of the primary care strategy. Obviously the additional roles is a big part of that. I've been meeting with some of the CDs actually in the east to talk about how we can work with some of our providers as well around rotational roles, so particularly around things like mental health, but not just for mental health. It's important across. So I think there's quite a bit of work we are planning to do, and I suggest we report back through the primary care committee.
I think that'd be really useful. Yeah. Sheila, did you re-raise your hand?
Yeah, I did. Can I just give you an example? So nationally, of physicians associates, 26% of them work in primary care, and yet the number of consultations is, 90% of consultations are undertaken in primary care. So there's a real mismatch there, and there is a big piece of work to be done in persuading the physician's associate workforce in particular. I'm singling them out because of this presentation I saw last week, that actually working in general practice is a good place to work, and we have a role to play in that locally.
And I'm sure we're going to discuss this at primary care committee, Joe, but there's also a quick wing potentially with pharmacists versus pharmacy technicians, and I think that's probably on our agenda for next week. So we need a decision there, because jobs are changing in that environment. People are losing jobs and they're available for employment by PCNs.
So let's take this discussion into the primary care committee, where we can have the being informed by the team's work, and then have the space for that conversation. And Judy's nodding, so that's helpful. Thank you, Judy. So that's almost the end. So thank you all for sticking with it today. I think we've covered some really good things. We've we're operating in an area where we're tired and we're busy in the same way that everyone else is. But thank you for the ongoing time and effort and concentration from today. Find something to relax and unwind with. Have some well-being space at the end of today, whatever that might look like for you. But for some of you, have well-being space from here on in, really, Virginia, as you retire. And just to echo Simon's words, just I will give you last word, as long as it's not too many of them, for the end of this meeting. So I've only, compared to people like Simon and Jane, I've not worked with you anywhere near as long as they have. But when I came into the wider Devon role, you were spoken of immediately with high regard, and that's been demonstrated in the time that I've worked with you. And I have to say, particularly in the COVID environment, which I'm sure was never your plan to end on such an event at the end of your career. So thank you for all you've done, and particularly thank you for your leadership when certainly public health action and messaging has been so challenging in this COVID era. So I know you're not retiring yet, so many of us will still spend some more time with you, but it's your last governing body. So thank you for all that you've done, and I do wish you all the best with whatever your next adventure is.
Thank you, Paul. I'm not going to say anything, but just very nice of you to say that. And thank you to all of the governing body for the good work that you've been doing over many years as well. Thank you.
Great. Well, take care, Virginia. Take care, everyone else. Thank you for your time today, and we will all meet again very soon.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.